What would you do if the person who was supposed to love you the most embarrassed you in front of the world? The grand ballroom was alive with laughter and chatter. Guests in glamorous attire swirled around the polished floor, the soft hum of the orchestra blending seamlessly with the clinking of champagne glasses. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting their glow on the guests, their polished smiles and perfect postures belying the tension in the air. At the center of it all, Tasha stood, her back straight and eyes forward, the picture of elegance. She was stunning, her dress shimmering as it hugged her curves, the diamonds at her neck catching the light in a dazzling display. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled, a crown of confidence atop her head. The world saw her as the epitome of grace, the perfect wife to her high-powered, wealthy husband, Michael. But behind her poised exterior, something was stirring, a gnawing feeling she couldn't ignore. As she glided through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with friends and acquaintances, she could feel Michael's hand at the small of her back, his fingers digging in a little harder than usual, reminding her of his presence. His fingers were always firm when he didn't want her to stray too far, always a silent reminder that she belonged to him. She had learned to keep up appearances over the years, to smile and nod and accept his dominance with grace. She'd learned how to play the role, how to be the perfect accessory to his power and success. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, there was an unease hanging in the air. Something wasn't right. Michael had been acting strangely all evening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to do something cruel, something that would test her resolve. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, calculating, cold. Michael thrived on control, on dominance. It was his way or no way. He had always liked to have the upper hand, and over the years she had learned to simply comply. But tonight, something in her stirred. Tonight, she wasn't sure if she could just sit quietly and let him have his way. As she caught her reflection in the polished glass of the ballroom, she took a steadying breath. The world saw a woman who had it all, the wealth, the looks, the life. What they didn't see was the reality beneath. They didn't see the small things, the way his eyes would turn cold when she disagreed with him, how his words could turn sharp, cutting through her like a blade. They didn't know how he belittled her when no one was looking, how he expected her to remain silent, to smile, and play her part. Her hands gripped her champagne flute tightly, the crystal edges digging into her palm as she watched Michael approach, his sharp features set in a tight smile. He was charming, of course, the life of the party. Everyone adored him. No one could see past the exterior, the powerful businessman, the generous philanthropist. But she saw it. She saw the man behind the mask, the one who only showed affection when it served his purpose. Tasha's eyes flickered to the guests around them, all lost in the celebration, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. They were all too eager to play their parts, to let the night unfold in its flawless rhythm. But she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight, everything was about to change. "Let's dance," Michael said, his voice smooth, his grip tightening ever so slightly on her waist. She nodded, following his lead as he escorted her to the center of the ballroom, the crowd parting to make way for them. The orchestra's music swelled and they began to move in perfect sync, as they always did. But inside, Tasha's pulse quickened. She could feel his eyes boring into her, sensing the shift in his mood. He was waiting for something, waiting for her to slip, to say something, to give him the excuse he needed to regain control. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music drown out the noise in her head. She could feel Michael's hand on her back, the weight of his expectations, but she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in years. It was small, but it was there, a spark of defiance. She wasn't just his trophy wife. She wasn't just a symbol of his success. She was a person. And for the first time in a long while, she realized that she didn't have to play by his rules anymore. As they twirled on the dance floor, Tasha's thoughts raced. She had always believed that she needed his approval, that her role was to be the perfect wife, the perfect accessory to his success. But now, something inside her was pushing back. She wasn't just going to sit quietly and let him take everything from her anymore. Tonight, she was going to take back her voice. She could feel it. The moment was coming, and she was ready. Ready to reclaim her power, her voice, ready to stand up for herself. Tonight, the world would see her for who she really was, not just Michael's wife, but Tasha, strong, independent, and ready to fight for the life she deserved. Where are you watching from? And what time is it? Drop a comment below. With a calm, deliberate motion, Tasha reached into her clutch and pulled out a set of papers. She held them up, letting the rustling sound echo in the quiet ballroom. "Michael," she began, her voice smooth but cutting, "since you love talking about how much you've done for me, let's talk about the truth." The words hung in the air, and everyone in the room leaned in, eager to hear what she had to say. Michael's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. He had no idea what was coming. Tasha slowly unfolded the papers, glancing at them before locking eyes with him. "You see, Michael," she continued, her voice steady, "this wasn't all you. You didn't build this empire alone. I helped fund your business in the beginning. I made sacrifices, believed in you when no one else did, and yet you've tried to erase me from the story as if I never mattered." Gasps rippled through the room. The audience, which had been silent, now whispered among themselves. The truth was unfolding in front of them, and they were stunned by the magnitude of what Tasha was revealing. Michael's face reddened as the realization hit him. He opened his mouth to speak, but his words came out sharp, filled with anger. "You're lying. This is all nonsense," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. But Tasha didn't flinch. She just smiled, a knowing, confident smile. "Oh, I'm not done yet," she said, her voice cool and collected. With one swift motion, she pulled out a second set of papers from her clutch, holding them up for everyone to see. The papers were official, bearing the legal seal of the court, divorce papers. "You thought you owned me, Michael?" Tasha's voice grew stronger, more resolute. "You never did. And tonight, I walk away, on my terms." The entire room fell into stunned silence. No one could believe what they were hearing. Tasha was done. She was reclaiming her life, her power, and she was doing it in the most dramatic way possible. She had been the one to fund his rise to success, and now she was leaving him with nothing. Michael, whose face had turned from anger to fear, stared at her, speechless. The bravado that had once defined him was crumbling before his eyes. He had lost control, and he knew it. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the audience processed what had just happened. Tasha wasn't just standing up for herself. She was showing the world that she was more than Michael's possession, more than his accessory. She was taking her power back. "I'm done being silenced," Tasha continued, her eyes locked on Michael. "You've taken from me for years, but tonight I take back everything you tried to take away." As the room erupted into murmurs, some of disbelief, others in admiration, Tasha stood tall, feeling the weight of every moment of control Michael had ever held over her slip away. She wasn't just walking away from him, she was walking away from a life that had never truly been hers. Michael, on the other hand, stood frozen his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find the right words, but nothing came. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price for it. For Tasha, this was the moment she had dreamed of for so long. No longer was she the woman hiding behind her husband's shadow. No longer was she the silent partner in his success. She was reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. This was her moment. Have you ever exposed someone who tried to break you? Tell us your experience. The room was quiet for a moment, the tension thick. But then, slowly, the applause started. A few scattered claps echoed in the otherwise silent ballroom, unsure at first. But, as the realization of what had just happened set in, the applause grew louder, more fervent. One by one, people stood to their feet. The business partners Michael had proudly boasted about just moments before now turned their backs, their disapproval clear on their faces. The same men who had once praised his success now shook their heads in disbelief, stepping away from him, their loyalty shattered. Michael stood in the center of the room, his face a mix of shock, anger, and humiliation. His world, his empire, his control, all of it crumbling before his eyes. Tasha, the woman he had tried to silence for so long, had just exposed the truth, and in doing so had freed herself from the chains he had placed on her. For the first time, Tasha felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The years of silence, the years of being made to feel small, of being nothing more than an accessory to his life, those years were gone. Tonight, she had taken control. The applause grew louder. People were standing now, clapping for her, cheering for the woman who had been strong enough to stand up for herself. The crowd that had once been captivated by Michael's wealth, his power, now cheered for the one who had broken free from his grasp. Tasha's smile was slow to form, but when it did, it was confident, unapologetic. She had spent so long fighting for her place in his world, only to realize she didn't need his approval or his world to matter. Tonight was her night. The people who had once ignored her, who had once overlooked her as nothing more than Michael's arm candy, were now watching her with respect. For the first time, she wasn't just standing next to him, playing the role he had forced on her. She was standing in her own light, taking back her own power. As the room continued to erupt in applause, Tasha stood tall, her back straight, her heart pounding with pride. She wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just a woman in the background. She was her own person. And for the first time in years, she felt powerful. Michael's reputation, the one he had worked so hard to build, was now in tatters. Deals that had once seemed secure were unraveling as his business partners distanced themselves from him. The empire he had so carefully constructed. It was all slipping away, all because of his need for control, his arrogance, and his inability to see the worth of the woman standing right in front of him. Tasha didn't need his wealth, his status, or his approval anymore. She had found something more valuable, the strength to be herself, to stand up and say, "Enough." For the first time in years, she felt free, powerful, untouchable. Her smile widened, and as she walked away from the wreckage of Michael's world, she realized that everything she had ever needed was already inside of her. She didn't need to play the part anymore. She didn't need to fit into his world. She was ready to create her own. Tasha had reclaimed her life. She had reclaimed her power. And as she left the ballroom, every step felt like a victory. The applause continued behind her, but Tasha didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already won. Would you have handled it like Tasha? Or done something different? Let us know below. Tasha stepped into the cool night air, the weight of the past few years finally lifting from her shoulders. Her breath felt lighter, her heart freer than it had ever been. The world was suddenly full of possibilities. She had always been seen as Michael's wife, always in the background, always second to him. But not anymore. Tonight, she had found her voice, and with it, she had reclaimed her life. For years, she had been living in the shadows of his success, caught in his web of control and manipulation. But now, with the applause still echoing in her ears, she was just Tasha, a woman with a story of her own, a story of strength, of survival, and of reclaiming her worth. She didn't need Michael. She didn't need the life he had given her. She had walked away, not just from a marriage, but from a life where she had been small, invisible. Now she could breathe. She could stand tall. The door to the ballroom slammed behind her, but she didn't look back. Michael was still inside, watching her with disbelief, his power crumbling with every second that ticked by. He had thought she would always stay. He had thought that he could control her forever. But the truth was, she had already left him long before tonight. She had already taken the first step toward freedom, the moment she stopped letting him define her. Tonight, she had simply sealed her escape. Michael's empire was fading. The deals he had once so confidently made were slipping through his fingers. His carefully crafted world of power and control had just crumbled in front of him. And it was Tasha who had torn it down. As Tasha walked down the street, the cool breeze caressing her skin, she didn't feel anger or bitterness. She felt pride. Pride in herself for standing up. Pride in the woman she had become. She had taken back her power. And in doing so, she had broken free from the chains that had held her for so long. She was no longer defined by the man she was married to. She was defined by her own strength. Tasha wasn't just leaving a marriage. She was leaving behind a version of herself that had been silenced, unseen. Now, she was ready to write her own story. A story where she was no longer just someone's wife, but someone in her own right. As she continued walking into the night, she knew she had done the right thing. She had taken her life back. She had done the hardest thing she had ever done. And she had done it for herself. Tonight, Tasha had reclaimed everything she had lost. Her dignity, her power, her life. And as the lights of the city twinkled around her, she whispered to herself, "I am enough." Where are you watching from? And what time is it? Drop a comment below.